And the rest of us are taking our Bibles, and we're headed to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12, as we continue what we're doing. While you're turning your Bible, and if you didn't get notes, pick those up at the back door so you can follow along a little bit better. Let me just do a little bit of a survey just on a gloomy morning to see if we can wake up a little bit. Name something you always have to keep plugged in. Clock? Fridge. Anything else? What? Your phone? What else? Somebody said clock. Okay. Coffee pot. Always running that coffee pot. For those of you who are addicted to that, right, Tom? Okay. Here's what they said. Baby monitors, computer or mouse, headphones, fridge, lamp, phone, and computer. TV was number one. Name a fruit you might eat in the morning. Banana, orange. What, cantaloupe? Grapefruit, here's what they said. Raisins, peach, melons, orange, apple, strawberries, grapefruit, and banana was number one. Finish the phrase. Hold the line is going to be there. Hold the what? Fort. Hold the fort. I think it's up there. Anything else come to mind? Hold the cash. Here's what they said. Hold the line. Hold the elevator. Hold the mail. Hold the door. And number one was hold the phone. Name something people stuff as much as they can into it. Did you say mouth? Did you say mouth? Okay. There's one up here that's close to that. What's that? Luggage. That's going to be up here. A grocery bag's not going to be up here. What'd you say? Lady's purse is going to be up here, okay? Because those you have to back up when you open them so it doesn't, hit you. The trunk? Okay. Here's what they said. Stomach. I guess that goes with the mouth. Purse. Pillow. Suitcase. Christmas stocking. Trash cans. Number one was a turkey. Stuff as much as you can into a turkey. Okay. What were some of the worst times in history for the Jews? I mean, what do you think of when you think of Jewish persecution? The Holocaust? Okay. So if we were talking and putting it into context and saying, okay, let's think of all of history. You would have the Egyptian slavery, was definitely anti-Jewish. You have the Babylonian captivity, which they conquered and destroyed Jerusalem and took others as slaves or refugees. Then you have the time of Esther that you're all familiar with, when Haman passed the law to do what? Kill the Jews, but then it got reversed, okay? And that became the Feast of Purim, okay? And then you have other persecutions, the Roman persecutions that were against the Jews and the believers that started. There's a time where in the New Testament era where the Jews were kicked out of Rome totally, and they were being exiled out of the main cities and having to go into villages. Then you have crusades. You have like the First Crusade when the church at that time, when all of us, and this isn't the real church, this is the false church, they marched all the way, and as they marched to do the crusade, they wiped out village after village of the Jews, wherever you'd find Jews as they marched across Europe. And then when they got to Jerusalem and they conquered, they put all the Jews inside one of the major synagogues there, and they lit it on fire. And they had barred them inside. Some did survive, and those who survived, they were sold into slavery. So there, you can understand in the Jewish mindset where they hear the word crusade and it has bad historical connotation. Then you have another one where England passed a law under King Edward that banned all the Jews, first country in the world to do this, banned all the Jews from their realm. They had to leave. Well, then shortly thereafter, you have France following and doing the same thing. Spain did the same thing, that they forced the Jews out of their country. A lot of them went into Central Europe. And then when they were all of a sudden the beginning of the Black Plague or the Plague of Death, the Jews got blamed for it. And one of the reasons was the Jews didn't have as much outbreak as the general population. Anybody want to guess why? Well, it was the Lord's blessing. Yeah, because of their legal system, their law, they had a better food handling, right? I mean, just think the Old Testament law. You bled the meat. You were very careful. The Old Testament law also said that you put your latrines outside the city. In most European cities, where was the latrine? The street. The street. And so the Jewish sectors, they didn't suffer as much from these plagues, and especially like the Black Plague, because they didn't have as many rats and mice carrying the disease. And so they were blamed for it because it didn't affect them as much. And so then you have as well, not only that happening, but then in Russia, which remember, a lot of them had to get out of Spain and France and went eastward. They ended up in the territories of Eastern Europe, and a lot of them into Russia. But then all of a sudden you had the czars doing in 1881. Tsar Alexander was assassinated. Well, they blamed it on the Jews, and so they passed what they started the pogroms. And one of those pogroms was the Jews had to vacate a lot of their property and go into communal centers that were set up and run by the government. Tens of thousands were killed, and a couple 100,000 refugees as well were killed. And then you go a little bit further in Russian history, you have Stalin, who just was brutal to his own people, to the Ukrainians, the Georgians, and the Jews in particular, and he killed millions of them. And then you know the Nazi story where they killed 6 million of them. And so, yet for all of the attacks, they are the only people group through history that has maintained its individual nationality and identity. Why is that? You have the answer. They're God's chosen people. And even when they got down to one descendant, twice in the Bible history, they get down to one male descendant of David to pass on the lineage, and God protected them. And it's an amazing story. And it's a wonderful story. And then we know by Bible history that it's all of a sudden 1948 is a wonderful event. What happened? They get back into the promised land, okay? And it's part of the end times story. But will their wonderful story continue? Not according to the book of Revelation. According to the book of Revelation, the Jews are facing the worst Holocaust yet in the future. And so that's part of what we're talking about in chapter 12 of the book of Revelation, where it's going to be just a horrendous period that's in the future, that 2/3 of the Jews worldwide will be killed. So whatever that number is going to become when the tribulation starts, it's going to be an amazing period. So let's set the scene for Revelation chapter 12. John has been writing about the last events. He has given us information in chapter 11 about the final trumpet that's being blown. And he says, then Jesus Christ at the end of that time will come and set up his kingdom, and he'll judge whoever enters into the kingdom. And then John backs up in part of chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 13. He backs up and he fills in a lot of the hollow spots, giving a lot of details of what leads up to that time when Jesus comes back and people start trying to resist Jesus taking over. And so he's giving us the information. And in chapter 12, he's told us about a vision that he sees in heaven. You can start reading it, catch it. We already had 2 Sundays where we looked at some of this already, but just as review. So let me just keep going quickly. In the vision, there's a woman. She's about to give birth, and she does give birth, and there's a dragon that's ready to swallow up the child as soon as the child is born. And then this woman is rescued, and the dragon goes after her several times according to the passage. The one comment that we haven't dealt with is this one. It's talking about the male child. So we're in Revelation chapter 12. We've kind of passed over this, and it says, verse 3, verse 2, she being with child cried, travailing in pain. She's about to give birth to be delivered of the child. There appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great dragon having 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns upon his heads. His tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for devour her child as soon as it was born. The next verse we haven't dealt with. She brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. You know immediately who that is. It's Jesus Christ. Okay, now look at several things in this passage. It says that he'll rule over all the nations. Where have we ever heard that before? Anybody remember any text that talks about ruling all nations? Psalm 2. Yeah. Psalm 2 is that prophecy that the world will resist, and then his anointed one will rule all nations. If you remember when we did that message a few weeks back on Psalm 2, if you remember the word for rule in the Hebrew and also for here when they're quoting it, it isn't the word that we typically understand as rule. It's the word that he will destroy or shatter with a rod of iron. We usually think it's the scepter rule. This is more like the beat-up staff that he will destroy. And so the idea in Psalms 2 is they are going to resist, but he's going to take power from them physically and take over, and all those kings and all those nations of the world, they're going to be conquered and defeated by this Messiah. Will that happen in the future? Does he come as a warrior? Does he destroy their militaries? Yes, he does. And so, according to this text, it's predicting that this male child who's caught up into heaven, he will one day come back as the judge, warrior, and he will then set up a universal, complete authority. He will take over by force world control. And remember when we talked about that, we used that silly illustration that if Jesus walked into Washington, D.C. and said, "I'm here," and we said, would Congress give up its power willingly? And then we had the silly illustration, if he went to the Kremlin and said to Putin, "Give me all your authority," would Putin give up his authority? No, and so that we stress that idea that he's going to take it by force. And so the dragon, in this whole setting, the dragon wants to destroy the child as soon as it's born, which some of you you realize exactly what that's all about. You understand the fulfillment. The child is going to eventually be caught up into heaven to his throne, and then what's going to happen is we understand that all of this is tying to the Old Testament. The Old Testament talked about the anointed one, the Messiah, when in that Psalm 2 passage. You understand that means the dragon hated this child even before he was born. You understand that he's going to become a heavenly ruler despite the opposition by the dragon, and you all understand immediately this is Jesus Christ. You, in fact, know how this was fulfilled. Okay? If we just break it down, was Jesus born a male child, a male human? Yeah, absolutely. So you have the incarnation, okay? Is it going to happen that Jesus will rule? That's future. Did Satan try to destroy the Christ child as soon as it was born? Yeah, you understand that point. Was he caught up into heaven? Yeah, when? The ascension, okay? Is he sitting on a throne? Yes, he's at the right hand of the Father even right now. So all of this has been fulfilled except for that one part of it that's yet to be future, that it's going to be fulfilled. Now I want you to catch something in this verse. This is important because this happens in Revelation, and in American thinking and understanding, reading history, we think everything is chronological and everything is just the puzzle fits in piece, everything really, really neat. Did you notice in this passage that in this vision, he's talking about some things past and some things future? He's blending them in this prophecy, okay, which isn't unusual that happens. He is also putting gaps of time in this. There's a gap of time, for instance, between his birth and his ascension, but it doesn't say that in the verse. But the reader is supposed to understand there's a gap of time. Is there a gap of time between his birth, his ascension, and when he takes over rule of the earth? Yes, there's gaps of time in some of these prophecies, which isn't a problem for Semitic writers and readers, but we Americans, we don't think that way. We ever think everything chronologically really spelled out. So understand that in fact, let me go back to the previous verse, when it says in verse 4 that the tail of the dragon drew down 1/3. What do you understand that to be? We talked about this already. Satan dragging down 1/3 of the angels when? When he fell. Okay, when was that? We really don't know. Between creation and temptation, okay, that he fell. We don't know when exactly beyond that. But there again, there's a huge gap of time interplaying in this prophecy, just jumping from one major event to another, which doesn't create you a problem, but for some people it does. So after the Messiah ascends, this woman is going to be attacked, because look at verse 6. Okay, Satan was defeated, couldn't get the child. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared of God that they should feed her for 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. And so she's attacked right away, and Satan's going to try to destroy her. Now, in history, what were the Jews attacked by, quote unquote, satanic forces after Christ? After he's in heaven, did the Jews go through a period of difficulty historically? We just talked about it. That it happened in the Crusades, it happened in Europe, were they attacked multiple times repeatedly? The answer is absolutely, positively. It's still going on. And so you understand, we already set the scene for anybody who's just first time here. We set the scene that the woman is representation of Israel. Okay, of Israel, that she represents the people of Israel through whom the Christ child came. Satan's trying to attack her, but then God is going to protect her, and eventually he's going to provide for her in the wilderness. Now, she's attacked by the dragon. We talked about who this dragon is. You look down in the next couple verses, it gives his name, Satan, the liar, the serpent. And so he failed to destroy the male child that was born, so he goes after the woman, Israel, because if he can destroy the Jews, he's proven that God has not kept his promise to his people, his covenant people. And so he's going to, especially, this passage is telling us that for all of the challenges that they have had, they all pale in comparison to the second half of the tribulation. The Holocaust, or whatever you want to call it, the pogroms, the persecution, the anti-Semitism, it's going to increase like never before. That's why it's called, in Jeremiah, this time period is called Jacob's trouble. That's why Daniel 12, Matthew 24 makes comment that this is trouble like never before in human history. And so we get this comment. So Satan, in this middle of that time period we already talked about, he's cast out of heaven. I think it happens in that first, that battle in heaven happens right around that midpoint of the tribulation. And so he comes down to this earth, and when he comes down to this earth, his attacks against Israel intensify because he comes with great hatred. And the end of verse 12, for the devil has come unto you having great wrath, and what else does he know? He knows his time is short. So for all the centuries that he's trying to wipe out the Jews, he knows he's got to really do it in a collective sense like never before, and so he goes after the people of Israel. So if you watch through this, you understand a couple things that we've kind of jumped over. He is able to be overcome. Satan is. For as grand and as powerful as he is, he's able to be overcome, because in this passage, he is overcome in battle by God's angels, led by Michael. We talked about that at length, and they beat him in battle. So he is not invincible. He is not one that is, non-resistant. But it takes a spiritual war in heaven for him to finally be cast out of heaven. He is also defeated by others, because what happens in verse 10, I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come the salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, or anointed one. For the accuser, our brethren, is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, that they love not their lives unto death. So it's not only supernatural angels that overcame him. There's another person, people, somebody overcomes. And it says they overcame him in verse 11. Who is the they? Well, it has to do with this loud voice. Okay, that gives us the key. The loud voice, the question is, who's speaking? Is this loud voice a single individual speaking? Is it a chorus of individuals speaking? We aren't clear on that, but what we are clear on is what they're saying. They're giving praise. They or it is giving praise, saying, okay, Satan's been defeated, and now it's time, getting close for Jesus to come and set up his kingdom. So they're very excited about the idea that God is going to take back control of the earth, just like Psalm 2 has predicted, that he's going to come and rule, and Satan has been dealt another decisive blow, being cast out of heaven and down to the earth. Now, in this same verse, it gives us an idea of who are the overcomers through that loud voice. Look at what the voice is saying. Look at some of the words. Some people think this loud voice, it's the angels that are rejoicing, and they're talking about them overcoming Satan in the previous battle. I'm sure they're excited that they defeated Satan, but I don't think it's the angels who are in mind in verses 10 and 11. The reason I don't think that is because of some of the words that are used. They talk about our God. It's a group. It's not a small one person. Our God, our brethren whom Satan accused before God. So it's whoever's speaking is somebody that is related to those whom Satan has been accusing and attacking before God. They overcame him. And it doesn't say by a battle, as mentioned in the previous verses, but it talks about they overcame him, they loved not their lives unto death. It can't be the angels he's referring to, because the angels, right, okay, even though some commentators that you're going to read, they're going to say, well, it's reference to the previous verses. It's not. It can't be. He talks about these people who have overcome even to the point of death. We have already read about that. We have read about believers who in Revelation chapter 6 have been persecuted to the point of death. They have been martyred, and they're in heaven, and they have said in the past, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our death? That has been believers in the first half of the tribulation. And you know, by virtue of the way things have gone, others since then have been dying, have been persecuted. So whoever's speaking at this midpoint of the tribulation is rejoicing that these people are going to be avenged. And he talks about those people having overcome the wicked one. How did they do that? How did they overcome him? They just make a statement very quickly in verse 11. They overcame. They defeated the Satan. They didn't kick him out of heaven, but how was it that they defeated? Now, something that's interesting here, okay? In modern Christianity, I say it real broadly, there are all kinds of gimmicks that are promoted for overcoming the spiritual realm. Oils, prayer rituals, incantations, all kinds of religious jewelry. That is not how they overcame Satan. What does it say in verse 11? By what? By the blood of Jesus, blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ. Okay, so it's very clear that it's the blood of Christ that has the power of salvation, the power of victory. It's not us. It starts with Christ. But do we have to play a role? Okay? What does the next phrase say? They overcame him by the blood, and what else? What's that mean, the word of their testimony? Is it witnessing? Okay. Is that the only thing you're talking about? Okay, what'd you say? Okay, they accepted Christ. Okay, that would have to be in here, right? Okay. Is there any other possibilities here? What's that? Okay, so you're saved by the blood, but you're also, you're showing a true Christianity? Okay, is that what caused them to die? Were they going contrary to the society? Okay, so if we look at it and say the testimony, it's the idea that they remained faithful, that they didn't give up. Now remember, Jesus has predicted that some seed will fall on the hard soil, and some will fall where it'll be all of a sudden consumed by and overcome by the thorns. And he says that that's the what? The cares of this world. Okay, so does that happen to people today? that people all of a sudden get interested in the gospel, or they may even make a profession, but in a short period of time, they aren't following. Does that ever happen? Okay. Would those people be the ones that would endure to martyrdom? No. No. But some, he says, have gone by the word of their testimony. They have even given their lives. They have been killed for their faith. And so you and I admire that, but what he's talking about is people who have really stood loyal to Christ, even to the point that I'm not denying him, even if it costs me my life. That's tough, because during that time that there's persecution, they're also suffering famine. They're suffering the economic woes. They're suffering, their family is suffering. And so he's calling these people as real heroes of the faith, if you would, that these individuals have overcome Satan, all of his attacks, all of his attempts to try to turn people away from the Lord. By the word of their testimony, they have remained loyal to Christ. And so they've gotten saved by the blood, then they're so grateful that they stay faithful. But Satan doesn't stop. Even though he's been overcome by some, Satan does further attacks. We read in verse 13, and when the dragon saw that he was cast to the earth, who does he go after? Verse 13, who does he go after? Okay, he goes after the woman, who are the Jews, and so Satan's going to attack. Now, this whole section is really, really interesting. It shows one of two things. It shows Satan is either really stupid or he's really stubborn. Or actually, the third is, he's both. Yeah, okay. So, but this section this is a warning section to you and me. This whole next few verses. It's a clear warning of how we should view this all. Okay, so he's attacking the woman. The word that is used here, where it says he persecuted, that's the word that we have up here, that he's hunting with hatred. He is viciously going after them. In the past, he's done that, but this now is the intensification of it. And so what happens in this text is, and again, this is all symbolism, the woman is given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for how long? 3.5 years. Okay, great. Okay, you got that point. From the face of the serpent. So what you have is some way, somehow, she's supernaturally protected. Now, the wings that she's given, like the wings of the eagle, there are multiple references in the Old Testament that talk about how God covers us with his wings, or that he saved people like on the wings of the eagle. So this isn't an unusual concept from Jewish literature in past times. And so she goes into the wilderness. Okay, that's somewhere into that remote region in that Middle East, exactly where, we don't know. The passage doesn't say. But while she's in this wilderness, she is, anybody have another word for nourished? Is that the right word? Am I thinking of the previous? Yeah, she is nourished. Is that your word that you have in your translation? Protected? Okay. The word is the idea of providing care for. Food, clothing, shelter, protection of some sort. There is a supernatural protection. By the way, going into the wilderness and having wings of eagles that are helping to take care of you. Anybody think of any Old Testament character that was cared for, provided for in the wilderness? Okay, yeah, Elijah. So she's provided. Can you think of any other time that Israel was supernaturally nourished with food? The manna, the quail, okay? So where this is exactly in the wilderness, I don't know. But it fits Matthew 24 when Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, don't go back into your house to grab things, run into the wilderness. And he's promising them that when they run into the wilderness, I'm going to take care of you. Okay, how this works, by the way, now bring us up to modern technology. How do thousands of Jews hide in the wilderness without being spotted for 3.5 years? We don't know. But can God put blinders on people and technology? Sure. Okay. So we don't understand how this all works, but God is going to take care of them in a supernatural way, the way he did in the past. Do you think that might have some influence on some of them coming to faith in Christ? Okay. So what happens is Satan, now think this through. Verse 13, his attack, okay, He's attacked the Christ child and tried to destroy, but he was defeated in that attack. He attacks in verse 13, and what does God do? God defeats him. Once again, God protects the Jews. Keep that in mind as we go then to verse 15. Satan, the serpent, cast out of his mouth water as a flood after who? Okay, after the woman, the Jews, that he might cause her to be carried away of a flood. You mentioned this. We looked at it just really quickly. When he's using the idea of a flood, what did you make comments that when it comes to a flood? How do you protect from a flood? You really can't. What do? You go uphill. Okay. I mean, how do you barricade from, you can sandbag and try. But again, Satan is attacking like a flood that you and I know the picture. It is devastating. It is overwhelming. How is Israel protected? Notice the next verse. What happens in the next verse? The earth opens up. Okay? Has there ever been a time in the Old Testament where God swallowed up Israel's enemies? When? The Red Sea. In fact, is it I think I have it up here. Let me remember. Yeah, in Exodus, when they're singing the song after the Red Sea experience, they make this comment: you stretched out your right hand and the earth swallowed them up. But we know it wasn't the earth that swallowed, quote unquote, it was the Red Sea. But it was an act of God that he says, basically creation destroyed them. And so here you have another, and by the way, there were occasions where the ground opened up and destroyed some of the Jews who were even opposed to Moses. But what you have in this setting is some way, somehow, God does another supernatural act via creation to do what? To protect the Jews, to preserve them from this all-out attack that's against them. Then you have verse 17. The dragon makes his third attempt, or should we call it the fourth? The dragon is angry with the woman, and so what does he try to do this time? He can't touch her. She's being protected. There is a spiritual bubble put around her by God's protection. So what does he go after? Verse 17. Her children, her offspring. Okay? And so now he comes after them, and his anger is intensified. He's either stupid, or he's stubborn, or he's both. That what happens is he, at the third attack, and he makes war, and you understand what that means. It is talking about this is an all-out attack. Now, who is he attacking? Who is that he talks about to the remnant of her seed? Her offspring. Who are the possibilities? Who's around at this time? You got 144,000, okay, that are going worldwide. What's that? The two prophets, and they're being supernaturally protected, but obviously Satan's going to attack them. Who else could be her seed? What's that? Okay, could there have been Jews, other Jews around the world that didn't go into the wilderness? Is that a possibility? Yeah, okay. Who else is a possibility? Are we called the children of Abraham? Galatians, okay. And we are, in people groups, what are we? They're the Jews, we're the Gentiles. Okay. Could it be Gentiles getting saved during that time period? The answer is we aren't really definitively sure who it is, but we do know Satan goes after believers, right? Okay, so he's going after Jews and believers. Now, the remnant of seed, let's just say it's other Jews. Let's just say it's those that are during that time, that it's just whatever's left of the Jewish population. So we know at the end from other prophecies, we know that there will be survivors, Jewish national Jews, religious Jews, who will survive. We don't know the exact number of how many survive according to these texts, but we are told that 2/3 will be destroyed at the very end of Armageddon, and 1/3 will be protected. So God is promising that there will be a remnant that will be carried through. Now, who it all involves, I'm not sure. Neither are you. But what does this tell us about Satan? Well, we already made this comment. He hates God. Viciously hates. You know how sometimes you had a conflict with somebody and you were really bugged, but over a period of time it might wane? It might go away, or it might be dissolved or reconciled. Does Satan ever reconcile with God? No, never, never. And we're talking millennia. We're talking of a hatred for ages. We know that he accuses the brethren. That's you and me, and those who are believers around the world. He tries to physically, violently destroy the Jews all through history, but again, it intensifies in the last 3.5 years. And if he went after God's own son, surely, what does that say to you and me? He's coming after us as well in the meantime. He has knowledge of God's timetable. We already pointed this out here a couple weeks ago. We pointed out he's not omnipresent, present, or omnipotent. It's important to understand he's powerful, but he is not God. That he is weak by comparison. He can be overcome and defeated. He is either determined, that is stubborn or stupid, or both, in that he attacks time and time and time again, but he is limited. And he knows he is limited. This is the funny part of Satan. He knows he is limited, but he's going to resist the one who limits him. What's that? Up to the last minute. And even after he's chained for 1,000 years, does he change his mind? Not a bit. He comes back, and when he gets out of jail after 1,000 years, he does the same thing. Stupid. Okay. Yet he does not fully accept God's power or rule over him. He will persistently seek to undermine God's person and power so as to discredit God. He is just plain evil. Now, all this passage for you and me tells us that we are also, we know from Ephesians 6 put together, we are in his sights. He is after us. He doesn't like us. He doesn't want us to be spiritually successful. And he is stubborn. He will attack, finish the phrase. He will attack us no matter what? What'd you say? All the time? Anything else? Any other words you want to throw in there? He will attack us. We know what you mean, buddy. Incessantly. But he can't spell it, he said. Okay. Whatever word you want to put in there, this is a vicious, vicious attack. We're in a spiritual battle, and we don't need to be foolish and underestimate the enemy, but we have the hope. We know that because of what happened on the cross, we can overcome his attacks. Because greater, okay, so it's an important thought. So we continue on. What happens in Revelation 13 continues. It's the chapter breaks aren't there by God, they're there by man, which I'm glad that they did put chapter breaks in so we could find the verses, okay, as we go through. So what happens, he's talking about how he's going to attack those who have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Somehow they're the believing Jews or the believing Gentiles. And then he says, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise out. Now, this goes together with the previous vision because of what happens in this verse. It says, I stood up on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his 10 horns, and upon his heads, the names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw, and so now we have to identify, previous chapter was a dragon. Now we have terminology saying a beast. So here's where you get into, okay, who is this? And who is this beast? Okay, is it the dragon of chapter 12, but pictured in a different sense? I don't think so. And I can give you several proofs that I would go by. I want you to notice something. They're very similar. If you notice the descriptions, which you will, right, we're going to highlight it here in just a second. They're very similar, but they are not the same beings. Okay, the dragon was seen in a vision that dealt with heaven and a scene coming out of heaven. The beast is dealing with not a vision of the heavens, but a vision dealing with the seas, okay, earthbound. Okay, and oftentimes, what do we say about how do we describe humanity? The sea of humanity, which means what? Vast number of peoples. Okay, so take it with that sense. So compare the descriptions in the origins, just from this verse and what you've already known from the previous. In chapter 12, verse 3, the dragon is starting off in heaven, which we have no problem. It's a supernatural thing. We're talking about the spiritual realm. The beast is starting off with the sea, the physical realm. So this character is coming out of or associated with, he's more earthbound, if you would, physically bound. He rises out of the sea. Then you have as well a similarity but a difference. Okay, give me a description of the dragon. When he is seen, what's given about him besides the red in verse 3 of chapter 12? What does he have? Seven heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns. That's the dragon, okay? 7, 10, 7. What about the beast? Verse 13, verse 1. 7 heads, 10 horns. Now it's different. What's the difference? Okay. Are there similarities? But is there a difference? Okay, so we're going to use the phrase, same thing, but, okay, there's a distinction between them, and yet because of their similarity, what does that tell you? What's that? Yeah, basically they operate, their whole purpose, very similar. Extremely similar, and yet there is a distinction. So when you have this, you're talking this one, and we'll just throw it out right at the beginning. This is Antichrist, who is empowered by who? By Satan himself. This is Antichrist. He's been talked about a lot in Scripture. So before we jump into chapter 13 and say, what does this teach us? Let's do this. Let's go back. And let's look at other phrases and passages that tell us information about this world ruler called Antichrist, upon which John is building. So I'm going to invite you to go to Daniel chapter 7. And we'll do a little bit of this, then we'll break and we'll pick up next week. Daniel chapter 7. These are the beginning references and prophecies and descriptions of Satan. Daniel is giving all these ideas when he's talking about the major world rulers. And so in Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9, Daniel 11, as he gives future prophecies, he's going to indicate there's a world ruler at one time towards the fourth kingdom or the final kingdom, the final phase of that kingdom, and he describes him. So we're jumping down to Daniel chapter 7, and we're jumping down to verses 20 and 21, just get in the middle. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against him, until the day that the ancients came and judgment was done. So just real quickly, what does this tell you about this Antichrist? I know we're jumping in the middle of a text, and you're hesitant because you don't want to say anything wrong, but okay, he's very powerful. Let's just break it down. Let's do phrase by phrase. He's part of a great final human government. These 10 horns, this 10-nation confederacy, okay, that he's part of this human government that is involving 10-nation confederacy, and it's something else that stands out, okay? So he starts out of this he starts with that final government, which starts with the 10-nation confederacy. He overthrows 3 of the kings of that 10-nation confederacy. He subdues them. How, what, I don't know. But it says that he's going to, if we throw the figures out, I'm not saying this is it, but let's just, for fun. There's 10 major nations in the European Confederacy. Antichrist comes out of that entity. He takes over the power, the control of 3 of those kings, and as such now he is, by virtue, he is the most powerful of the remaining 7 or 6, whatever the number would be. He's a great orator. He speaks great things. Would that be important for him to be able to persuade people? Oh yeah, okay. He is physically attractive. Do people vote on appearances? Yes or no? Sure they do. People didn't like orange hair. So they didn't vote because, certain candidates because of sometimes the way they look. You wouldn't do it. You would vote on principle. But are some people shallow, and that sounds really harsh, but are some people shallow enough that they will go by appearance only and not what the person believes? That happens today? Yes, okay. So he's physically attractive. He makes war against the saints. This is what's being highlighted in the book of Daniel. He makes war against the saints. He even is victorious over believers. He is successful in his attacks to a degree, okay? And so he is just this vicious character. Now let's go a couple verses later. It says, and the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise from them, and he shall be different from the first, and shall subdue 3. It's a repetition, but an explanation of what we just said, where it says that he will go on, and he shall speak, verse 25, speak great words against the Most High. What's it mean, the next phrase? So he's a blasphemous character. He's totally against God. What is the next phrase says? He shall wear out the saints. What does that mean? What's that? Persecute? Okay. And when you're talking about the saints of the Most High in Daniel's time period, who are you referring to? Israel. Okay, you're talking about the Jews. You're talking about God's people at the time of Daniel. So he's going to be oppressing the Jews more and more and more and more. We go a little bit further in this text, okay? And it says, he will think to change the times and the laws. What in the world does that mean? Such as what? Okay. Could it be referring to the times and the laws? In that phrase, he's going to wear out the saints of the Most High. Could it be that he is going to change the Jewish calendar, the Jewish feast days, the holy days, and what they observe, because he is exalting himself to be as God? Could it be he is suggesting change the natural flow of the work week? God created a natural element within creation. You work 6 days, so the week is how long? 7 from creation. Have social groups ever tried to change the week? They have. People have tried. During the French Revolution, they tried to change the week. When the Bolshevik Revolution took over, they tried to change the week. They thought a 10-day work week would get more out of the people. What happens? What's a natural, it's worked, it's in your body, it's in the system. What happens? You burn out. People don't end up not producing the way that they normally could. Could he try that? That's a possibility of the text. We go on, he shall be given, they shall be given into his hands for a time, times, and a dividing of time. What number you want to put right next to it? 3.5 years. Okay. So you have this passage starting to talk about this guy who's coming, and it's going to tie in. And if we had time, we would jump to chapter 8. But we're going to jump to chapter 8 next Sunday and continue adding to this what is stated about him and then build on it in Revelation 13. Thanks for your input. Let's get ready for our morning worship time.